Oh, well, it wasn't a negative thing at all. I saw too many champions go out the wrong way. Joe Louis, come on, he was a tremendous champion, but to see him get knocked out of the ring and crawling through the ropes is not the greatest image you want to have of a champion like that. I always wanted to be bold and brazen, so in order to do that, you had to finish as MVP of the league in your last year. Most of them are very effective in the social life of America today, but it's never been publicized, and we don't try to publicize it. Because when you do the right thing in America, you become the greatest threat to the way of those who dominate others. People have spent a lot of years asking me about greatness. Who was the greatest running back I ever saw? Which quarterback would I pick if I had one game to win? Those questions never really bothered me, but I always thought they missed something important. Football is not built by one position. It is not built by one era, and it's certainly not built by one man. I was fortunate enough to play during a time when this league was filled with remarkable players. Some were teammates, some were rivals. Some came before me and set a standard I had to live up to before I ever put on a helmet. I wasn't interested in hype. I wasn't interested in headlines. I wanted to see discipline. I wanted to see courage. I wanted to see someone who could perform when everyone in the stadium knew exactly what was coming and still couldn't stop it. This is part of a series I've been doing where we sit down with the legends of this game and let them speak plainly about who really left a mark on them. If you've caught the others already, go check them out after this one and hit subscribe now if you want to catch the rest as they come. Now, these aren't necessarily the 5 most famous names in football history. These are the men who made me stop, watch, and appreciate what this game could be when it was played at the highest level. Whether that was a man who set the standard before I ever arrived, a teammate whose greatness I watched being built up close, or a man who made me earn every single yard I ever gained against him. Number 5, Otto Graham. Before I ever put on a Cleveland uniform, Otto had already built this franchise into a winner. He led the Browns to championship games in every single one of his 10 professional seasons, 7 of them resulting in titles. That's the standard I walked into when I arrived in Cleveland, a city that already expected greatness because Otto had already given it to them. I never got the chance to share a backfield with him, but I understood exactly what his career meant to this organization, and I carried that same responsibility with me every time I put on that same uniform. People forget just how dominant those Browns teams were before I ever got there. Otto quarterbacked this franchise through both the All-America Football Conference and the NFL, and this team simply didn't lose championship games with him under center in that first league. 4 straight titles before we'd even joined the NFL ourselves. Then he came right into this league and kept winning anyway. I used to hear the older men around the organization talk about him with a kind of reverence I didn't fully understand until I'd been in this league myself for a few years. Once I understood the weight of what it takes to win consistently at this level, I understood exactly why they talked about him that way. Number 4, Paul Warfield. Paul and I shared a locker room in Cleveland before he ever became one of the greatest receivers this league has ever seen. I watched him develop that combination of speed and precision that later made him nearly impossible to cover once he got to Miami. What I always respected about him was the quiet way he approached this game. No wasted motion, no wasted words, just complete mastery of his position. Years later, when people talked about the great receivers of that era, his name always belonged in that conversation. And I got to see the foundation of that greatness being built right there in our own locker room. Paul didn't put up the loudest numbers early in his career because we ran this offense through the ground game more than the passing attack in those years. But you could already see it in practice, the way he separated from defensive backs without ever looking like he was working hard to do it. He went on to become one of the most feared deep threats this league has ever seen. And I've always believed that's a special kind of talent, the kind you can spot years before the rest of the country catches on. I got to see it first, right there in Cleveland, before anybody outside this organization understood what we had. Now, people have asked me for years who the toughest men I ever saw across that line of scrimmage were. And two names always come to mind before anybody else because they hit different than everybody else in this league. Number 3, Chuck Bednarik. They called him Concrete Charlie, and that nickname fit him perfectly. He played both ways for the Philadelphia Eagles, center and linebacker, back in an era when a man's body had to hold up for 60 minutes instead of just half of them. I've said it plainly before, when people ask me about the hardest hitting players I ever saw, his name comes up right alongside the very best of them. He hit you like the entire game depended on that one single collision, and there wasn't a running back in this league who looked forward to seeing him lined up across the field. Number 2, Sam Huff. I'd say Sam Huff was the most effective defender I ever saw in my entire career, and I mean that. Our battles became so well known that Time magazine put him on their cover with a story called Football's Toughest Job, built entirely around the challenge of trying to stop me. In December of 1958, his Giants held me to just 8 yards on 12 carries, one of the worst days of my entire career. And Sam himself said afterward that it was perhaps the finest defensive effort they'd ever put together against me. There was a hit in that game so hard that Sam thought he'd knock me unconscious. I got up quick just to prove I hadn't been. That game sent the Giants on to face Baltimore for the championship, a contest that later became known as the greatest game ever played. And I always believed that game with us helped prepare that Giants defense for what was still ahead of them. Sam went on to make 5 Pro Bowls in his career. And decades later, people still talk about him as the first defensive player in this league to become a genuine national name, all because offenses had to build entire game plans just to slow down what I was trying to do. And he was usually the man standing in the way. That's the kind of respect this league builds between two men, not through friendship, but through what happens when you collide with each other over and over for years. Before I get to my last name, go ahead and drop your guess down in the comments for who I've got at number 1. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because there's a lot more of these legends still coming. This last name, I don't talk about him without something changing in my voice, because this isn't a story about a rivalry or a teammate in the usual sense. This is about a young man who should have worn this same uniform right alongside me and never got the chance. Number 1, Ernie Davis. In 1962, the Browns drafted Ernie with the plan of putting him in our backfield together with me, 2 great backs sharing the same load. Ernie had already become the first black player in history to win the Heisman Trophy, and everybody in this league understood what kind of talent was coming to Cleveland. Before he ever got the chance to play a single professional down, doctors diagnosed him with leukemia. He passed away in May of 1963, 23 years old, without ever putting on that uniform in a real NFL game. I spent time with Ernie during that final year of his life, and I can tell you, there wasn't an ounce of self-pity in that man, even knowing what was happening to his own body. He carried himself with the same dignity he'd shown winning that Heisman Trophy right up until the very end. Ernie Davis never played a single down in this league, and he still belongs at the top of any list I ever put together, because what he carried, the hope, the promise, the barrier he'd already broken just by being drafted. That's a kind of greatness statistics could never fully capture anyway. So there it is, Otto Graham, the standard this franchise was built on before I ever arrived. Paul Warfield, a teammate whose greatness I watched being built right in our own locker room. Chuck Bednarik, Concrete Charlie, a man who hit like every collision was the last one he'd ever get. Sam Huff, the most effective competitor I ever saw across that line. a rivalry that made both of our careers mean something more. And Ernie Davis at the top, a young man who never got to play a single down in this league and still represents everything greatness in this game is supposed to mean. Now, I already know some of you are going to have your own lists. Maybe you think a different rival deserved a spot here. Maybe you've got a teammate of mine you think I left off entirely. Go ahead and tell me down in the comments where you think I got it wrong. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe, because there's a lot more of these legends still coming. And I promise you, every single one of them has stories just like this one.